I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 39 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, June 1st, 2022, the committee is meeting to study Bill C-235, an act respecting the building of a green economy in the prairies. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Donc, bon après-midi tout le monde. Ça fait plaisir de...
So, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you.
Of business that, in terms of how we're going to proceed on the clause by clause today, I'd like to share with you. So, comme son nom l'indique, cet exercice.
As its name indicates, I will call each clause one by one, and each one can be debated before voted on. If an amendment that's been moved to an article, to a clause is questioned, I will give the floor to the member who moved it, who can explain it if he or she so wishes. The amendment is debated and then voted on when no other MP wants to speak. The amendments will be reviewed in the order. I would remind all members that all the amendments must be submitted in writing to the committee clerk. Since this is a first experience for this committee, the chair will be going slowly so that everybody can follow the proceedings properly.
Given an alphanumeric number in the top right corner to indicate which party submitted them, there is no need for a seconder to move an amendment. Once it's been moved, you will need unanimous consent to withdraw an amendment. Au cours du débat sur un amendement, les députés sont autorisés à proposer.
During the debate on an amendment, members are authorized to make sub-amendments. These sub-amendments must be submitted in writing. They do not require the approval of the sponsor of the amendment. One sub-amendment can be considered at a time, and this sub-amendment must be amended. It cannot be amended. When a sub-amendment has been moved to an amendment, it will be voted on first. Then another sub-amendment can be moved or the committee can examine the main amendment and vote to approve it or reject it. Once the clause has been voted on, the committee will vote on the title and the bill itself. If the amendment is adopted, once the amendment's been adopted, so that the House can dispose of an up-to-date version for the report stage, though it will be reprinted. Finally, the committee will order the chair to present the report to the House. Is that clear in everyone's mind? I think we're ready to begin our clause-by-clause consideration. Pursuant to 75(1) of the Standing Order, consideration of the title, Clause 1, is postponed, and we will now proceed to consideration of Clause 2. Is that all right? So, Clause 2. Are there any amendments that have been moved?
Oui, je reconnais Monsieur Fillmore.
I recognize Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll draw committee members' attention to the package of amendments that's before them, specifically G1. And this is a very simple amendment. It is simply changing that the minister responsible be the minister responsible for the economic development on the prairies rather than the minister of industry.
Oui, je reconnais Monsieur.
Mr. Ferguson?
For going slowly. Mr. Fillmore, could I just, I don't have a problem with the change. Could you provide an explanation as to why the change of minister?
Well, certainly, it's the bill itself refers to the prairies and economic development in the prairies, and by good fortune, we have a minister whose portfolio is exactly that. So it just makes good sense that we would have a minister who would be more wholly devoted, have more of his attention to devote, his or her attention to devote to this bill and its outcomes than the Minister of Industry.
Merci, Monsieur Fillmore. Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Viss.
It's just another question to Mr. Fillmore in good faith. My experience with Pacific Economic Development and previous to that, Western Economic Development, is that those ministers don't generally have much say over economic or in policy. They generally hand out grants to various businesses and organizations in their respective provinces. So this would effectively enlarge the responsibility of the respective Minister of Economic Development by including this clause in this piece of legislation. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I just wanted to know whether the government side thought that implication through.
Thank you. I think that the excuse me, the drafter had included the Minister of Industry at the beginning. Forgive me, Chair, if I may. Had included the Minister of Industry at the beginning as a statute minister. We were under the impression, the drafter was under the impression that it must be a statute minister that is responsible in a case like this. We later it was determined that a non-statute minister could in fact be the minister responsible. We think it's a great idea. The drafter thinks it's a great idea for the reason that this will be a minister whose entire focus is the prairies and its well-being. As we know, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry is drawn in many directions at once, including a lot of his time spent overseas developing trade opportunities for Canada. We believe that the good outcomes intended by this bill would be better served by someone with better focus on the prairies.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So I guess, and I guess my question will go back to Mr. Fillmore. There's a lot of language in here that does talk about for instance, the summary that you still will have collaboration with the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Natural Resources, and any minister responsible for economic development in the prairie provinces. So I think we already had that minister there, but it seems to me, are we eliminating then the Minister of Industry? So the Minister of Industry is being eliminated, but still we have collaboration with the Minister of Environment, Transport, Finance. So I guess I'm just wondering, should the Minister of Industry still be included in some port of this summary? And I guess how would we do that? Thank you.
Chair, if I may. Yes, you're quite right. The Minister of Industry is still implicated in a later amendment. You'll see where that comes up. In fact, I believe it's G2 and G3. The amendments together eliminate the Minister of Industry as the implicated responsible minister, but add the Minister of Transport back in as one to be consulted with and to be part of consultations and collective work going forward, as you'll see, along with Minister of Agriculture and Finance and Natural Resources and Transport. So the Minister of Industry gets put into that group of ministers, but we need somebody who's front and center. And the drafter and our team, I believe, feel that it's best if it's the person who's devoted solely in their portfolio to the well-being of the prairies. So the Minister of Industry doesn't go away. That minister becomes one of the consulted ministers along with those others that I've mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Williams.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question. Just because some of us are just coming into the INDU committee and just with clarification, is this the only bill relating to one part of Canada for a green economy? Do we have an act respecting green economy of Atlantic Canada, for instance? Is there any other, or is this the only one that we have in front of us so far, or have in front of us in front of Parliament? Thank you.
I'm not sure, Chair, who the question was directed to, but I could offer one observation. There are regional bills like this, regional efforts that have passed in the past. For example, in the East Coast, we had something called the Atlantic Growth Strategy that was specifically geared toward some of the deeply ingrained economic hardships that we face in the Atlantic provinces, and a special program was developed around that. So I liken this to that. So there is some fairly close precedent, I would say.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Williams.
So where I'm getting to, and through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps for Mr. Fillmore again, did we give that responsibility to another minister, or did the Minister of Industry have that responsibility?
It was the minister responsible for ACOA. So the equivalent of the Minister for the Prairie Economic Development Organization.
Okay, sorry, and just one last
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Fillmore. Yes, Mr.
Thank you,
Williams.
Mr. Chair. So just to get the wording right, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Fillmore, whoever wants to answer that, then is this similar language? So did we have still, the minister then would be collaborating with the Minister of Finance, Environment, et cetera?
That's exactly right. If you were just to flip to G2 and G3, you'll see that all those ministers are together in a very happy collaborative space within the confines of this bill.
Okay. I see no more interventions. So, est-ce que l'amendement G1 est...
Does Amendment G1 carry? Yes? Good. So now we will, so shall Clause 2 carry? As amended. Good. Now, Clause 3. Mr. Fillmore, do you wish to talk to G2?
Thanks, Chair. And this will sort of pick up where we left off. What these two amendments are trying to do is to create a complete list of ministers that will be consulted and have input and responsibility with regard to the bill. I would therefore propose that the line 14 on page 1 be replaced with the following. And it's odd, it starts in the middle of a word, so it sounds like this. ISTER of the Environment, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Industry, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, the, and that ends the replacement of line 14.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. So are there comments? Yes, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fillmore, as I mentioned to you earlier in our conversation, so if I'm, just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, because the current version at this clause has, at 3.1, has the Minister of Finance on the list, and if I'm interpreting your Amendment G2 correctly, the Minister of Finance is no longer part of the list?
But we add the Minister of Finance in on G3. So I could provide a little detail. It does, I beg the members' patience on this. It is a bit confusing. As written, the bill unamended mentions in this clause Minister of Environment, Transport, Finance, Natural Resources, and the Prairies, and the minister responsible for the prairies. Who's missing from this list is industry, agriculture, and that is what these amendments are trying to put together in a way that works well for the legislative clerk within the kind of the construct of these lines and these clauses. So the net result of G2 and G3 is to add the two missing ministers to the existing list of ministers. And that's what we'd like to get to.
I had Mr. Cram and then Mr. Perkins. Just before I give you the floor, Mr. Cram, Mr. Fillmore, if it's possible to lower your boom a little bit, because we can't hear you very well. So,
okay, is that a little bit better, Chair?
I think it is. Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
We can
Cram.
keep on.
Yeah, so Mr. Perkins asked what I was going to ask, and I'm happy with Mr. Fillmore's answer, so we'll just move on.
Perfect. I see no other Mr. Okay. So, donc, est-ce que l'amendement
Shall Amendment G2 carry? Good. Given that G2 has carried, CPC1 can't be considered because it has the same effect. Are there any other further amendments with respect to Clause 3?
J'ai
Yes,
Monsieur
sir.
Fillmore avec G3.
G3, Mr. Fillmore.
Amendment to make sure that list of ministers is complete. So now we will replace lines 15 to 17 in clause 3 on page 1 with the following. Minister of Finance and the Minister of Natural Resources develop a framework to coordinate, and again, it ends in the middle of a word. And taken all together, that gives us our complete list of ministers.
Yep. OK. Est-ce que l'amendement G3 est adopté?
Shall Amendment G3 carry?
Merveilleux.
Good. G3-1.
Monsieur Fillmore?
Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you. This is strictly to correct the omission of municipalities as one of the consultees in the process of working on this bill. So it proposes then to replace line 4 on page 2 with the following: and with municipalities, indigenous governed bodies, the private sector. So really it's exactly the same phrase that's there. We're just adding municipalities into the mix.
Merci, Monsieur Fillmore. Je vois Monsieur Lemay.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Lemay.
Pardon, c'est plus dans l'esprit d'un commentaire. Évidemment, le projet de loi ne s'applique pas au Québec, mais si ça s'appliquait au Québec, on s'y opposerait parce que ce n'est pas au fédéral de pouvoir consulter les municipalités, mais bien aux provinces, duquel elles...
Juste un moment, Monsieur Lemay.
Oops. Is it resolved now?
À vous la parole, Monsieur.
Thank you, Brian. My comment was that this bill does not apply to Quebec. It applies to the prairies. But if it did apply to Quebec, we wouldn't agree to this amendment because it is up to the provinces to deal with the municipalities and not the federal government. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Are there any other comments?
I would agree with my colleague. The municipalities are a creation of a provincial act and derive their powers from that. They're not a constitutional entity, and as such, I think we would oppose this in general form because of that.
Donc,
Pardon me, Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks. I won't chase this one too far, but I would just point out that, for example, in the Investing in Canada infrastructure plan, we got a really good national infrastructure plan in part by consulting with municipalities, even though it is the job of the provinces to have that formal relationship. It's important, and I think incumbent on all of us when we set policies that impact all orders of government, that we consult with them, even though there may not be a formal constitutional relationship there. And so I'll leave it there.
merci, Monsieur Fillmore. Donc,
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. So G3-1. Shall this amendment carry? On dissent.
parfait.
CBC2 was withdrawn, which leads us to CBC3.
Est-ce qu'il y a un proposeur pour cet amendement?
Is there a mover here?
We had, I wasn't in the committee for all the hearings on this bill. I just in on the last one, and in some of my questioning of one of the witnesses in that last meeting, I was trying to ascertain that as a company that was in the mining business, they were already both highly regulated, and their regulator requires a certain amount of extensive consultation when they already do their work. In addition, as a mining company, they were expanding that beyond just what was required by law, and so, I think from a philosophical basis on our side, the idea that we would impose a duplicate consultation process on a company or an entity when other laws and other requirements, whether they're provincial regulation, provincial regulators, national regulators, already covering and require them to make those. So there are some instances where laws or companies aren't regulated. So the intent of this amendment is to say this process is okay if they aren't already covered by some other regulatory process that requires them to do this consultation anyway. So it's trying to avoid the duplication of two efforts and the prolonging of costs and of time to get projects passed when really it's not needed in certain circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I have Mr. Erskine-Smith.
My instinct was to say the same as Mr. Perkins, like we don't want duplication. I think we're sensitive to that. We don't want duplicative sort of processes here. But for clarity, the language of subsection 2, the imposition is not, the obligation to consult is not on the private sector. The obligation to consult is not on other orders of government. The obligation is on the minister. And that obligation rests specifically in relation to the development of a framework pursuant to this specific legislation. And on the reading of 2.1, the proposal here, effectively what we're saying, if we adopt this, it would be the consultation provided for under subsection 1.2, i.e. that obligation of the minister pursuant to the development of this green framework for the prairies, is only required if such a consultation process is not already provided for under any act of parliament or any other act of a province or bylaw of a municipality. It's not required. There's no obligation on a minister under any other act to do this development work. So I would say, to the extent we want to avoid duplication, the work of a minister doing this kind of work, if there's a subsequent act of parliament before us that would impose such an obligation, then we can deal with it at that time and maybe say, let's not do it. We already have this Green Prairie framework. But as it stands, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Merci, Monsieur Erskine-Smith. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Mr. Perkins.
I certainly see that viewpoint that you're expressing, but I do believe that simply because this act requires the minister to conduct a consultation process for companies or projects or initiatives that are already covered by other law at other levels, thus ensuring that there is a duplication of effort coming in. The intent of this clause is to avoid that.
Merci, Monsieur Perkins. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres?
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Any further comments with respect to CPC 3?
There doesn't seem to be agreement amongst the parties on this amendment, so I would probably have this amendment go to a vote. However, if you just bear with me for 1 minute, we'll just wait. Okay, Mr. Cram has maybe something to add while we're waiting, Mr. Cram.
Yes, while we're waiting. So, I think one of the challenges that the sponsor of this bill has encountered from the beginning is to strike the right balance between being inclusive and not being redundant. And I think that this amendment helps to strike that balance.
Appreciate your timely intervention, Mr. Cram. And juste pour être sûr que tout le monde soit sur la même.
Just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, the Mr. Erskine-Smith's intervention has shown that there's no consensus. So I'd ask the clerk to go ahead.
CPC 3, Mr. Fillmore.
Oppose.
Mr. Dong.
Nay.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I vote no.
Ms. Lapointe.
Nope.
Mr. Gahir.
No.
Mr. Viz.
Yay.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Mr. Cram.
In favor.
Mr. Williams.
In favor.
Monsieur Lemieux. And Mr. Massé.
Oui.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
OK, donc l'amendement est
So the amendment, CPC 3, is carries. That which brings us to CPC 4, and I have made a decision. So that leads us to CPC 4. Is someone wish to move the amendment?
we're now on to CPC 4. I'm looking for a mover. Mr. Williams.
I will move the motion. Would you like some explanation on it?
It's entirely up to you, Mr.
Thank you. Well, I don't mind doing that. So, I think there was a big need to include, what's happening right now in the prairies in terms of what we feel is significant for economic development and jobs at the moment. And obviously, when we talk about green, we're not talking about eliminating these jobs in these industries. We're talking about greening these jobs in these industries. And when we talk about traditional energy in the prairies, we are talking about Canadian oil. We're talking about natural gas. And one of the big parts of this was also adding in the line to prevent carbon leakage. So when we talk about certain technologies that obviously we've heard from other witnesses and we want to continue to speak about, that's carbon capture. That's including making sure that we're retrofitting and fitting our piping, so it's obviously greener. We're talking about the industries that are employing, roughly in Canada over 585,000 workers, and in the prairies, that is significantly where most of, or 80% or more of that industry are. So we thought it's very important. It's something that we're very adamant on to include this line into this bill. It does talk to the significance of those industries, but also, of course, this is a green bill, and it talks about that. It has to include those industries and how we're also greening those industries there, significantly because of, one, the jobs that are there and that importance to the prairies and importance to Canada, and secondly, because of the need to work with those industries and have consultation and make sure that we're building that very important part of Canada. So that's why we included this clause, and we wanted to make sure it was a big part of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Williams, et j'apprécie.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I appreciate your comments, but Bill C-235 enact respecting the building of a green economy in the prairies. The amendment is designed, among other things, to foster job creation in traditional energy industries in the prairies rather than encouraging the development of a carbon-neutral economy, particularly through job retraining. So in the House of Commons Procedure and Practice Manual, 3rd edition, on page 770, it's written that amendment to a bill referred to a committee after the second reading is inadmissible if it goes beyond the scope and the principle. So the chair is of the opinion that job creation in the traditional energy industries is contrary to the principle of the bill. Therefore, I declare this amendment inadmissible.
So we can, if there are no other comments, then we will move to the next amendment that we have, which is G4. So G4, I see Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks, Chair. Because the contents of G4 is contained in the contents of G5, we will not move G4, and happy to move on to G5.
OK. Donc le G4 n'a pas été G4 from what I gather, so we're now on to G5.
And I'll speak to that if it suits the chair. So this is talking about the notion of economic growth and skills transfer and that kind of thing. So what we would like to do here is replace line 14 on page 2 with the following. fostering job creation and economic prosperity as evidenced by supporting outcomes. We came to this because we heard in testimony some pushback on the notion of retraining. So we landed instead on economic prosperity. I think if members wanted, we could include the term skills transfer, because that phrase was discussed in testimony in a positive way as opposed to retraining. But we'll start with the way it's written now. Fostering job creation and economic prosperity as evidenced by supporting outcomes in regions.
Merci, Monsieur Fillmore. Je vois Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. As a comment, in the translation of G5, it talks about regions. If I go back to the English version, I see the whole word regions is written in full, but it's just ré in French.
Oui, peut-être juste pour préciser, si vous regardez.
If you look at line 14 and 15, page 2, you'll see that ré is the last element of line 15 on page 2. Thank you, Mr. Crum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. Fillmore, through the chair, I was a bit curious about the phrase supporting outcomes, or as evidenced by supporting outcomes. So evidenced by supporting outcomes of what? Of job creation and fostering economic prosperity, or by greening the prairie economy? If you could clarify the intent of that clause, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair, if I may. So we heard testimony that said it would be great if there was some kind of nod in the act to metrics, the fact that we want to actually measure something and observe something that's changing, some positive outcomes. So this was the attempt at that. That's what it is. That's what's meant by as evidenced by supporting outcomes in regions. I think if we wanted to change some wording there to make it a little more clear, that would be great. I think particularly if we were to change, for example, if we change it to fostering job creation and skills transfer as evidenced by supporting outcomes in the region, that probably clarifies what supporting outcomes are. Job creation and skills transfer, that's clear. We're clearly talking about jobs. But I think we're open to improving this language if folks have suggestions.
Monsieur Perkins?
I'm still a little confused, mainly not about, I think, Mr. Fillmore, what you thought might clarify it a little more, but I don't know what you mean by supporting outcomes. Is that proof of success and on some specific metric? To me, I'm not understanding the phrase. And then my second question is this is about the prairies, but we use the word regions in the amendment. So is this contemplating something broader than the prairies? So there's two questions I have here. I still don't understand supporting outcomes. I get fostering job creation and the economic transfer of success of training or retraining or whatever you're getting at is what you're trying to say. But it has to be done in a way that we can prove there are results. Is that what you're trying to get at? And
yes.
And
Chair,
what regions?
Sure. I'll take one more. I'll take another crack at it. So let's clear up the regions first. I believe that the author of the bill recognizes that the prairies are a vast place and there are multiple regions. And so I think we clarify that by saying prairie regions, or the prairies even, but prairie regions might be the right word. But then coming back to the notion of metrics, I think it would actually clarify matters if we swapped the phrase economic prosperity for skills transfer. That was I think the intention of the drafter here was really about jobs. So fostering job creation and skills transfer as evidenced by increased employment. I think anything like that would work just great.
OK, donc peut-être, Monsieur Fillmore, juste
Mr. Fillmore, could you please repeat the exact wording?
proposing
Yes,
there's
fostering
agreement.
job creation and skills transfer as evidenced by increased employment in prairie regions.
Okay, so I see some form of consensus with this sub-amendment. So,
Mr. Chair, just one clarification on skills transfer. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Fillmore, can you just please just clarify that a little bit more? Skills transfer, that's upskilling, training. What would you define skills transfer as?
Yeah, it came up in testimony once or twice, but there was some backlash to the notion of retraining. I think the witness described to us that they felt it was demeaning in some way to workers who have valid skill sets and who don't want to or need to be retrained, but they can actually repurpose those skills, and we should refer to that as skills transfer. So that's all that is. We're softening the language of the original drafting, which was retraining, to skills transfer. Does that help?
So instead of, sorry, I'm just going to clarify. So through you, Mr. Chair, instead of skills training, we're replacing training with transfer. Would that be correct?
Right. The idea that a welder in the oil patch could be a great welder on a solar farm. Already knows how to weld.
Would be then, and just by supporting outcomes, I agree with increased employment. I guess, was there any talk about increased, training? There's something around the training programs or school. I'm trying to think of school programs. I don't think there's a specific word you can put in there but I love that we're looking at outcomes. So it's great that we have specifics we're going to replace supporting outcomes with. I'm just wondering if there's anything else with the skills transfer that we would then put into wording that would essentially mean that we're seeing that outcome besides just increased employment.
My sense of this is, as someone who's been involved in writing public policy for a very long time, that we don't want to get too prescriptive in the legislation and maybe leave room in the work that follows among the consultations to determine what the positive outcomes are, but that we give it some general framing and direction here, perhaps in the language that I've provided.
Mr. Fillmore, and just to be sure that everyone's on board, would you mind repeating one last time the change in language that you've proposed? And by the same token, I would ask you if you could, or someone in your team, send by writing to the clerk this sub-amendment.
Sure. Okay, so the language, we would replace line 14 on page 2 with the following: fostering job creation and skills transfer as evidenced by increased employment in prairie regions.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. So is it the will of the committee to adopt this or to adopt this sub-amendment? I see general consensus in the room. Okay. Est-ce que l'amendement, donc, G5...
Shall G5, as amended, carry?
Merveilleux.
Good. We will now turn to G6. Mr. Fillmore.
I beg the forgiveness of committee members who may be getting tired of hearing me speak. This is a quick one, though. So this is simply making a change that the drafter that would improve the drafting of the bill. This clause refers to building a zero-emission green economy. What we really want to be building is a net zero green economy. So this is simply adding the word net before the words zero emission. To say it officially, we would replace in the English version line 16 on page 2 with the following: them to build a net zero emissions green economy and period.
Merci. Est-ce que la...
Thank you. Shall Amendment G6 carry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Filmer, just a quick question. I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure before I vote on it. Could you explain what you see as the difference between a net zero emissions and just zero emissions the way it's written right now?
Yeah, sure. There are lots of ways to get to net zero. There's only one way to get to zero, and to get to zero, you have to stop putting carbon in the atmosphere and stop burning fossil fuels. To get to net zero, you can have transfers and swaps and all kinds of things that still get you effectively to net zero, but still allow the very necessary combustion of fossil fuels and other emissions still necessary in industry. That's the sort of a high level description of it.
Yeah, I think that's a worthwhile amendment. So, are there any further comments? So, est-ce que l'amendement G...
Shall Amendment G6 carry? Good. Which brings us to CPC 5.
J'ai l'amendement CPC 5.
CPC 5, does someone want to move it? Go ahead, Mr. Perkins.
I think it's probably pretty self-evident. This is adding additional important industries in Western Canada to the framework, perhaps maybe overlooked a little bit, but to include natural gas, liquefied natural gas, oil drilling, pipeline transportation, ensure more of our world-leading environmentally, socially responsible oil and gas reaches foreign markets, which we need to do to reduce carbon around the world. And that's the purpose of adding this to this consultation.
Merci, Monsieur Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Once again, however, I have a decision that I'd like to read to you. Bill C-25 enacts an act respecting the building of a green economy in the prairies. The amendment, the purpose of the amendment is to prioritize development projects related to traditional energy industries in order to replace higher value energy sources produced under emissions that with lower human rights standards. But in the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, third edition on page 77, it is written that the amendment to a bill that is referred to a committee after second reading is inadmissible if it goes beyond the scope and the principle. I feel that the amendment adds another criteria, that is compliance with norms, and as such, I feel that this new concept goes beyond the scope of the bill, and I declare this amendment inadmissible.
Ce qui nous amène
Which now brings us to Amendment PV1.
Peut-être le faire parce que je pense qu'il n'y a pas de représentation.
Perhaps I can do it.
Oui, mais Monsieur Lemire, juste peut-être un petit point.
Mr. Lemire, this is the first time that I've done a clause-by-clause consideration of a bill. I know it doesn't look that way, but the amendment is moved. You can, if you want to intervene on it, I would simply like to say that I support this amendment and I will vote in favor of it. Are there any other intervention with respect to the Green Party motion, PV1? Yes, Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and we will be opposing this. I do like that nuclear energy has been included in the content section, line C. We certainly look at net zero emissions or zero emissions when we look at nuclear energy, and especially CANDU, Canadian nuclear energy. It certainly is probably one of the top reasons we can find net zero in emissions, especially when that's combined with the need for energy and power as a whole. When we look at across the world, CANDU continues to be the pillar for nuclear energy, not only with the technology that we've had for many decades, but secondly with the new modular nuclear reactor technology that's being developed in Saskatchewan and in the prairies specifically. We have some of that technology being developed in Ontario, which is, of course, fantastic, but in the prairies, more importantly, because of the work being done in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon. Certainly when we've studied this in Science and Research Committee, and we've had quite a few studies on nuclear technology, every expert talks about two things. Number one, the need for 3 times as much energy in our grid by 2030, and the fact that nuclear power is the only way that we're going to be able to achieve that with a sort of a net emissions base. And if we remove nuclear energy from that, every expert has testified there's no real clean way to add power that goes to people's homes to power them, that allows people to heat their homes during the wintertime when it can be quite cold, I hear, in the prairies. And certainly when we're looking at the need for Canada to look at lowering emissions and providing that technology across the world, I think specifically our nuclear energy and nuclear power modular reactors and our CANDU energy is something that the European Union is looking at right now. So when I talk about it from an innovation and industry perspective, it's also something that we can export, meaning it does increase jobs and GDP. And what did we call that? The line, the supportive outcomes, right? But I think that's the premise of this is very much it can be debated. It is absolutely a green technology because it does remove emissions. And when we look across the world on nations like China who are burning coal in their power plants, nuclear technology is the only answer to replace massive amounts of energy need and to reduce emissions. So on that note, we will be opposing this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. I have Mr. Crum, Mr. Massey, and then Mr. Perkins. Mr. Crum.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just along those same lines, at the October 20th meeting, we heard from Mr. Dale Austin from Cameco Corporation, the uranium mining company, and he was, I would say, one of the more supportive witnesses of the bill, and he was very clear that there is no way to get to net zero without nuclear energy, and so I don't know how this bill could possibly proceed if this amendment proceeds. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Crum. Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the interventions. I want to be clear that I will be supporting this amendment, and the reasons being is that I've been actively opposed to the storage proposal of the DGR in the Bruce Huron area. For members that are not aware, this is to build a nuclear storage facility within a kilometer of the Great Lakes. That is actually the length of the CN Tower. There was actually a turning down of that proposal by Saugeen First Nations, and then the subsequent one just went next door to Saugeen Nations and has actually created quite a conflict. And to conclude, this is actually a policy Canada promised never to do under then Joe Clark as the Foreign Affairs Minister under the Brian Mulroney government. So until there's resolution to this situation, I will not be supporting the expansion at this point in time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee.
Merci, Monsieur Massey. Monsieur Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate Mr. Massey's position, but, you know, there is no way that we can get to net zero if in places other than the prairies we were to eliminate our nuclear energy, whether it was Ontario and certainly in my part of the world, New Brunswick. And I know the New Brunswick government is looking at part of their strategy to get off of the Saudi Arabian oil that we're required to burn in Atlantic Canada to expand the small modular nuclear program and make that an important part of the net zero carbon economy for the Atlantic. So to lose that opportunity for that initiative and to lose that tool available to us for the prairies in this bill, I think would be, quite frankly, going against the goal of getting to net zero for our country.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I'm looking around the room. I don't see anybody else who wishes to intervene. So there is no consensus on PV1, so I would ask the clerk to proceed with a vote.
Vote is on PV1. Mr. Fillmore.
In favor. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. I opposed.
Mr. Dong.
Nay.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Opposed.
Ms. Lapointe.
No.
Mr. Gahir.
Against.
Mr. Perkins.
Against.
Mr. Cram. Mr. Viz.
Opposed.
Mr. Williams.
Je vote contre.
Monsieur Lemire. And Mr. Massé.
Oui.
Two yeas, 9 nays.
Donc l'amendement PV1
So PV1 is rejected, which brings us to Amendment G7. Does someone wish to move G7? Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members may recall that during previous discussion at the committee, when we were discussing nuclear, it had been framed, I think, in the original drafting as a new form of energy, and there was an intervention that reminded us all that, in fact, there's a long history in Canada of nuclear energy. It's not a new energy source. So this amendment amends the bill to reflect the fact that it's not a new energy source and simply would replace line 22 on page 2 with the following: make use of all sources of energy, including nuclear.
Monsieur Fillmore, est-ce qu'il y a des interventions?
Are there any interventions with respect to G7?
Je vois personne.
No, I don't see anyone, so G7 is carried.
Qui ne dit mot consent, il est adopté, ce qui nous amène à l'amendement CPC6. Est-ce que j'ai un propos?
This brings us to CPC 6. Does someone wish to move it?
Mr. Perkins.
So I guess the simplest way to put this the purpose of this amendment is to try and moderate sort of the top-down orders from Ottawa when there are already other vehicles available for this consultation. So we'd like to continue to push for this amendment and approaching this part of the bill by modifying it by saying supporting the continued development as opposed to integrating, which was the original language.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Are there any comments? Monsieur Lemire.
On va voter contre.
I will be voting against it. So we could simply vote it with dissidence. I think. Can we have the motion carry on dissent? Shall Amendment CPC 6 carry with dissent?
Alors, ça nous amène à l'amendement G8.
This brings us to G8. Do I have a mover for G8? Mr. Fillmore.
And you're on mute, Mr. Fillmore.
Begging your pardon. This is amendment based on the testimony of a number of witnesses, the Alberta Irrigation Districts Association, the Canadian Cattle Association, for example, that large water projects, irrigation projects, should be included in the scope of this study. So we are simply adding a phrase, including large water projects, and it goes like this. So we would replace line 32 on page 2 in clause 3 with preparing infrastructure projects, comma, including large water projects, comma, that facilitate. and so on.
Thank you. Are there any comments on the amendment G8? Mr. Perkins.
So just a clarification in the interpretation is the reason that adding large water projects being put in this bill is that if there were if this bill passes and there were a large water project that happened on the prairies, it would not be required to go through this Ottawa-driven consultation process?
Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. So if we look at the framing on page 2, it starts with the content. The framework must include measures that promote economic stability and growth and employment in the prairie provinces by, and we'll skip down to F, the subject of this amendment, preparing infrastructure projects that including large water projects that facilitate adaptation to climate change and mitigation of its adverse effects. So this is really in direct response to for example, the Canadian Cattle Association. I can say that the eastern part, this is a quote, I can say that the eastern part of the prairies was impacted by pretty significant flooding this year as well. We're just seeing major shifts one way or the other. Critically, we need systems that make us all more resilient. To the degree that this bill will help with that, we're definitely supportive. And there's a similar quote from the Alberta Irrigation Districts Association that I could offer if asked.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Perkins.
I appreciate that, but I'm just not sure why we're in this subsection of the bill, why we're picking out just water projects, because otherwise I believe they would already be covered even without it. I know I asked the question in reverse last time, so I'll ask it in the positive this time. It's a sort of general clause now, isn't it, that prepares all the infrastructure projects at blah, 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 blah. So it doesn't eliminate any infrastructure project from being under this. So I'm not sure why we need to list just this one particular type.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins, for your comment. I don't know if Mr. Fillmore, you want to volunteer a comment. Otherwise, we can. I see there is probably disagreement on this amendment. I can call it to a vote, which I would ask the clerk then to proceed to.
Mr. Fillmore.
In favor.
Mr. Dong.
Oui.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I vote yes.
Ms. Lapointe.
Yes.
Mr. Gahir.
For.
Mr. Perkins.
Opposed.
Mr. Cram.
Opposed.
Mr. Viz.
Opposed.
Mr. Williams.
Opposed.
Monsieur Lemire. Mr. Massé.
Opposed.
5 yeas, 6 nays.
Thank you very much. So Amendment 8 is rejected. That brings us then to CPC 7 has been withdrawn. So est-ce que l'article 3...
So shall clause 3 as amended carry? So I see that clause 3 carries as amended, which leads us to clause 4 with G9. Do I have a mover for G9, Mr. Fillmore?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is just shortening the report deadline from 18 months to 12 months, giving the minister 6 months fewer to prepare the report to Parliament. So it goes like this, replacing line 35 on page 2 with the following: within 12 months after the day on which this act.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Are there any comments on Amendment G9? I see Mr. Crum. Mr. Crum.
Yes, I remember this one came up. I believe it was the sponsor of the bill who first floated that idea in the very first meeting. And throughout the course of the study of this bill, I don't think we found any witness who had actually been consulted about the bill before coming to committee. And indeed, I found quite a few who had never even heard about it until I reached out to them. So I don't see what has changed since that first meeting to justify a compressed timeline, but I'd be open to hearing other views on that subject. Thank you.
Are there other views on that subject? If there are none, I can call this amendment to a vote. Seeing that there are none, I will then call this amendment to a vote.
Okay, so the question's on G9.
G9, yes.
Mr. Fillmore.
In favor.
Mr. Dong.
Oui.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Lapointe.
Yes.
Mr. Gahir.
For.
Mr. Perkins.
Opposed.
Mr. Cram.
Opposed.
Mr. Viz.
Opposed.
Mr. Williams.
Opposed.
Monsieur Lemire. Mr. Massey.
No.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Donc l'amendement 9 est...
G9 carries, bringing us to G10. Is there a mover for this amendment? Mr. Fillmore.
Yes, this is regarding the publication of the report once it's completed. And the original drafting, when we're on page 3, lines 1 and 2. The original drafting of the report said the minister must publish the report on the website of the Department of Industry. However, you'll remember some of our very early amendments today broadened the responsibility to a number of ministers. And so this amendment acknowledges that and says the following. We would replace lines 1 and 2 on page 3 with the following. The minister must publish the report on the departmental website within 10 days after the ends mid-word there.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Are there any comments, Mr. Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Fillmore, would it not be more relevant to post these on all the websites if we are seeing this through all the ministers? All the relevant ministers.
The relevant ministers. I mean, it's a fair question. I can imagine that there would be natural resources information that might not be exactly relevant or important to post on the Minister of Finance's website. I think this was opening it up to sort of put the information on the website where it most closely cleaves, whether that's natural resources or agriculture or industry or transport, rather than flooding them all with things that may not be relevant to the mandate of that particular minister.
Mr. Perkins.
So I think that's a great idea, Mr. Fillmore. I don't think that's what this says, though. This, I think, because of the earlier amendments making the Prairie Economic Development Minister the responsible minister, it means that this has to be published on that minister's website, regardless of what other ministers are driving the bus on this, if I'm reading this right.
Any comment, Mr. Fillmore? I think Mr.
Yes,
Williams.
I'm thinking very carefully about Mr. Perkins' wise intervention there. I believe that he makes a good point, and in fact, I'm going to have to reframe my framing, and say that yes, in fact, this amendment is intended to get the report on the responsible minister's website that we set up back in G1, which is the minister responsible for prairie economic development.
So just to understand, Mr. Fillmore, are you then proposing to just modify the language of G10
No, thank you, Chair. When I was modifying the language of my framing, I think actually the language of the amendment is fine, and Mr. Perkins interpreted it correctly in his first instance.
Okay.
Because we've established in G1 that the minister in this bill is in fact the minister responsible for Prairie's economic development.
So that minister's website, if we read this correctly. So is there agreement to adopt G10? I see agreement around the room. So G10 is adopted. L'article 4, donc, est-il...
Shall clause 4 carry as amended? Good. Bringing us to clause 5, G11. Does someone wish to move the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members will remember G2 and G3. These are the analogs of that, but later in the bill. So this is simply clearing up the ministers that are, excuse me, the ministers that are implicated by this bill, so that the list is complete. Now, the speedy way to do this, I mean, just like with G2 and G3, we had the ministers spread over two amendments. Likewise, that I spread over 2 amendments here, G11 and G12. What I'd like to propose is that we not table G11 and just instead table G12 and have committee members move the sub-amendments to include the missing ministers.
Okay, just so we proceed in the proper fashion, Mr. Fillmore, so I understand you're not moving G11.
That's correct.
So now that brings us to G12.
That's right. So why don't we start with tabling the amendment, and then we can fill in its missing pieces by sub-amendment, if I could propose that. So I'll table the amendment. It's to replace lines 8 to 10 on page 3 with the following. Of transport, comma, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, comma, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Natural Resources prepare a...
Okay, I think the amendment's been heard, and where you had some slight change that you wanted to propose to it. By the way, by way of sub-amendment.
Yes, I'm just making sure I have all the members, all the ministers here. Agriculture, Agri-Food, Finance, Transport, Natural Resources. Yes, we're just missing the Minister of Industry here. So I would propose to insert anywhere in that list the Minister of Industry.
There was so I understand there was the Minister of Industry was missing, so you're just proposing to add it to the list set forth in G12.
I could reread it with that inclusion if that's helpful.
I think we all get it. I'll just go to Mr. Perkins first. Mr. Perkins.
I'm sort of striking out what I think is being withdrawn with this rewriting of the clause. So I'm just want to check to make sure I've got it correct. If I'm reading G12 correct, what's being deleted after Minister of Transport is the Minister of Finance, and the words, and any minister responsible for the economic development in the prairie provinces. Is that correct?
Lines 8 to 10.
I don't know if Mr. Fillmore, you can read to it. That's not my understanding, but I have instead of
it is to remove the prairie provinces minister because they are the minister in the bill, and these are the supporting ministers. And the reason being is that the reason being that the minister can't consult with himself or herself. So this clause is about the Minister of Prairie of Prairie Economic Development consulting with these other ministers. So that minister is eliminated from this list.
That part makes sense, but I think the Minister of Finance is dropped as well, right?
No, it is still there
No,
in the amendment,
there.
and I think Mr. Fillmore was also proposing to just add the Minister of Industry, which is missing in the amendment G12.
And that way, Chair, if I could, it's the exact same list of ministers that we had in G3 is brought forward here.
So is the sub-amendment to add the Minister of Industry, I see no opposition to that. Slight, okay, we'll just take our time. OK, donc, est-ce que le sous-amendement pour ajouter le ministre de l'Industrie...
Does the sub-amendment adding the Minister of Industry carry? I don't see any objection to that. So does Amendment G12 as amended carry?
The amended amendment now for clarity?
Sure, yes. Before we go, so would Mr. Fillmore, would you like to just read it one last time as amended? And if you weren't on mute, that would be ideal.
Thank you. Replace lines 8 to 10 on page 3 with the following: of transport, comma, the Minister of Industry, comma, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, comma, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Natural Resources, comma, prepare A.
Amendement G12 est-il...
Shall clause G12 carry, or amendment G12 carry? Good.
Ce qui nous amène à CPC.
Bringing us to CPC 8, which can't be moved as G12 makes it obsolete. That's right. Shall clause 5 as amended carry? Yes? So the short title, shall the short title carry? Yes? Shall the title carry? Yes? Shall the bill as amended carry? On division?
Et le comité ordonne-t-il au président?
Shall the committee request the chair to report the bill to the House? Yes?
Je comprends que c'est tout en division. Oui.
I understand it's all on division. Shall the committee request that the bill be reprinted as modified for the use of the House at report stage? Yes.
Article par
That concludes our clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-235.
It is much appreciated, and that was the only order of business. Yes, thanks to you. So it was a first experience for myself and for this committee in this legislature. So I appreciate your collaboration, your hard work, and thanks also to the legislative clerks and to the analysts, translators, and all support staff. That concludes the business we had on the agenda today. Oh, I see Mr. Massé. Mr. Massé, before I adjourn, the floor is yours.
I just want to say, Mr. Chair, to you and the supporting staff, and how well of a job it was, and for also explaining your decisions about amendments not being in order. Very much a really good process today, and I wanted to assure you that it made things a lot easier and was well done.
Well, thank you, Mr. Massé. That's really the credit goes to our amazing staff here in the House of Commons. So thanks to all who have helped with this. And with no further ado, this meeting is adjourned.